So a few years ago, I was chatting with somebody, and she was talking to me about women of the Bible and saying how much she enjoyed learning from women of the Bible. And often we talk through the book of Ruth and make a series out of that. But that little discussion, it was maybe a 30-second discussion, kind of stuck with me and stayed with me and made me think, we need to do something about that. And so we're finally at that point where we're going to be talking about 4 different women in the Bible. Today we're going to be talking about Rahab, but then because it's women, we've got some women who are going to be sharing and speaking as well. Next Sunday, Katie is going to be talking about Lydia, and then Kamal's going to be speaking about Esther, and then we're going to finish off this series with Priscilla talking about Ruth. I'm looking forward to hear from them, to hear from myself, how God used these people, these women, to change lives, to make a huge, lasting impact. And so we're going to just jump into it. We're going to talk about Ruth, a courageous woman. In our Advent series, our Arrival, we actually went through some Old Testament passages leading up to the fact that, Jesus and God have been arriving in our lives a long time before Jesus' birth. And one of those times was talking about when the Israelites were at the Jordan River, when Joshua had taken them to the Jordan River, Moses had taken them to the Joshua had taken them to the Jordan River to go into the promised land. We used kind of this idea of we have a promised land, we have heaven, we have a place where we're going to go for all eternity if you've said yes and are a follower of Jesus Christ. But the events were very real, and we're going to look at those real events this morning. Now, remember with me, 40 years before this time, Moses led the people to the Jordan River, and he sent in 12 spies. If you recall with me, there were 12 spies that Moses sent in and said, hey, spy out the land, take a look, see what's there, and come back and report to me. And so the 12 went, and they came back. 10 of them came back, and their report was, wow, these guys are huge. We look like grasshoppers to them. We can't take that land. There's no way that we can do it. And so they gave a bad report and actually convinced the other Israelites, to not do this and not trust God and not follow Moses, but to say, we can't do it. Out of the 12, there were 2, Joshua and Caleb, who said we can do it and wanted to go into the promised land. But because the 10 came back and convinced the rest of the nation not to do it, God said, you get to wander around in the wilderness for 40 years until this generation dies. You're going to wander, and then we'll come back here. And that's where we are this morning. Moses has died. All that generation has died except for Joshua and Caleb, who are now Joshua, who is leading the people. God has brought them back to the Jordan River. And instead of sending 12 spies over, he decides to send 2 spies to check out the land. In Joshua chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, it says this, and Joshua the son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go, look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed here. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. They went to spy out the land. And Joshua told them to go in and check it out, and especially Jericho. And I think it's because Jericho was the first city of any size that they were going to run into across the Jordan. And I've got a little map there. I don't know if you can see that way back there or not, but you got the Dead Sea, you got the blue line, which is the Jordan River. The yellow line is going over the Jordan to Jericho, and that's the first major city that they were going to go and see once they got into Canaan in the Promised Land. Now, it wasn't a huge city by our standards. It wasn't that big, but it was well fortified. It had big walls, thick walls all around it. And back then, they were city-states. They had a king over that city in that area. And these walls, as we know if you read farther into Joshua, these walls needed to come down, and God did an incredible miracle to bring those walls down. But these walls made it a very hard city to conquer. So here we are, these spies that Joshua decides to send in, they cross the Jordan River somehow, go into Jericho, and we meet Rahab for the first time. Rahab, now, there's nothing that tells us why they chose her house. Maybe they thought that no one would think it's strange that different people were going in and out because it happened. Some believe actually that she was running an inn as a prostitute, which was fairly normal in those days. And so there were a lot of people who were coming and going. It was a place where people would stay, where travelers would gather, and it was also a really good place to gain information because people were coming and going all the time. Joshua sent them in secretly, but as is often the case, things don't stay secret, right? You think you're hiding something and no one knows it, or no one will see it or anything like that, but somehow it comes out, and here it came out. Someone saw them and reported back to the king, hey, Rahab's got Israelites. They're spying us out. They're trying to check us out. She's got Israelites staying in her place. And so the king sent this message, bring them out. So the king's men went and passed on this message to Rahab. Now Rahab was a prostitute, as we read. Rahab was, at best, someone who was shoved to the fringe of society, someone who didn't feel like they belonged. She was probably just trying to survive in that world at that time. She was on the rough edges. She was probably destitute, displaced. In a place, as a prostitute, we think she's beyond, God using her in his plan or for his purpose, but that is so far from the truth. God still uses Rahab, this prostitute, to fulfill his purpose and his plan. Rahab, in spite of who she was, saw these spies come to her, and she stepped into this situation. It was not an easy situation. It wasn't a comfortable situation. It was a completely unsafe situation, but she decided to step into this situation with courage. To step into it with courage. It took a courageous action to protect these spies, to lie to the king's men who were questioning her. This courage was an act of her faith. It was an act of faith. Now, Rahab's faith, I think, was surprising because of who she was. Yes, she was a prostitute, so already in our minds, we think there's an issue going on. But she was also living in a society, in a city, in a country, really, that worshiped false gods. Like, they staked their lives on these other gods like Baal and Asherah and Marduk. The God that they saw as powerful, the gods that they saw as important, as they did sacrifices, they did everything with these false gods. As part of that society at the time, as a prostitute, yes, running a business, her only safety, because she wasn't married, Her only safety and security was being part of the city. And by saying yes to stepping into protecting these spies, she was putting her safety and security at risk, let alone her life. Because when she lied to the king's men, it was treason. Everybody knew that treason meant death. So it was a surprising thing that she had this amount of faith, because the stakes were extremely high for her, and she knew it. And yet in the midst of this really uncomfortable, completely unsafe thing, she decided to say, I'm going to step into this with courageous faith. So some surprising things we learn from Rahab about faith. We learn from Rahab that courage and faith can show up anywhere. Show up anywhere. It's not just those who look good or feel the part or show up on Sunday morning or watch online all the time or read their Bible every day, all of those things. It's not just those people. Courage and faith can show up anywhere, at any time, in any single person, whether they're faithful or not. And sometimes it shows up in the place that we least expect it. The place that we least expect it. Rahab was a prostitute in this land that was worshiping foreign gods. It was her safety. It was her protection. It was everything. It took a lot of courage to say no to all that, put her life and her standing at risk. A least expected place. And yet, there it was. We look at the story from human eyes and we see that God is working in this situation. You see, at the right time, God breaks through into this Amorite woman's life who lives in Jericho, and she provides shelter to Hebrew spies as they prepare to attack the city. Where did she gain this faith? How did she come up with this courage to act? I think that answer comes out of verses 8 to 11. It says this. It says, before the spies lay down for the night, she went up to the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord is giving you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did in Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, who you completely destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. The people of Jericho had heard about this nation of Israel. They heard about these people who more than 40 years ago now had crossed the Red Sea, but she knew about that. The people knew about it. They remembered what God had done 40 years ago for them as they came out of Egypt. They heard about this miraculous escape and how God separated the Red Sea and that they walked on dry land. They heard all of that. They heard how God had protected them by swallowing up the Egyptians who were chasing after them and how they drowned. It says this, and I love these words, our hearts melted with fear. That's a pretty significant picture, right? It's like they were standing up, look at us, we're Amorites, we're strong, until they think about God in the lives of the Israelite people, and they melted in fear. I think that fear probably grew stronger. It probably didn't matter to them when they were, over in Egypt or when they were wandering around in the wilderness. But I can see, maybe I put myself in their place and maybe this is just me, But as they're making their way through the wilderness and we hear word, because they know what's going on in the land, we hear that they're coming toward the Jordan River, they're coming toward us, and at that point I'd be thinking, can't you find a different place to cross? Like, I don't want you here because, your God's a strong God. And she started by saying, I know the Lord is giving you this land. I know. She knew more. She had more faith. She had more belief than the Israelites did 40 years ago. She says, I know. We know what God, your God, is going to do. There's no history of really when she came to faith or came to this belief, but we see that this belief had an action. This action actually is an incredible example to us. Faith is about action. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31 is a New Testament passage that tells us about her. It says, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And then James talks about her a little bit as well. In James chapter 2, verse 24, it says this. You see that a person who is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone, in the same way was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction. You see, our actions confirm our faith. To say, I have faith, but no actions, James says, that's dead faith. She said, I know God has given you this land. We as a city, nation, our hearts are melting in fear because you're just encamped on the other side of the river from our city. What does that mean for us? And she decided she was going to stake her claim with the Israelite nation, not with those in Jericho. Not with her false gods, but with the God of Israel. If you would look in Matthew chapter 1, actually, Rahab is talked about there. She is a descendant of Joseph, connected, obviously, with Jesus. She married into the nation. It's really interesting. Because again, the least likely places of faith make a huge statement and change. Without faith, without that action of faith, we lose so much. Our actions confirm our faith. We need to offer what we have to God, and that's all that Rahab did. What did she offer? Well, she offered the opportunity actually to hide the spies, protect the spies, and give them a way out. See, her house was on the city wall. A great place to escape if they needed to, and the king's men came and they said, send them out. She said, they're not here. They must have already left. They snuck out, and so you need to go after them. And she sent them really fast away, and for whatever reason, they believe they didn't check everything out. They're hiding underneath the straw, the hay, whatever, the flax I think it was, on the rooftop. But they didn't check. They just took her at her word, and so they left right away, and she told them that, you know what, you need to go find them. If you don't find them soon, they're going to be gone. And so they went on their way. What I find interesting also is that Rahab referred to God by the name that God gave Israel through Moses, Yahweh. The Lord your God, the Lord Yahweh. Not just a generic God term, but the God of Israel term, that personal term, that term that was so meaningful to them. She used those terms to acknowledge who God was. And it reflects that personal depth that she had as well. We learn that there's that deeper personal connection that the more we learn about this personal God, this God who loves us, who cares, who gives forgiveness, who is ready to move us forward to fulfill his plan and purpose, the more personally we are related to him, the deeper we get to know him, the more he transforms our lives. And when God transforms our lives, I believe that's when courage and faith really kick in. It's not just, I said yes to Jesus and now I'm a follower of him. No, it's stepping out in faith and making a difference in those places that feel uncomfortable. There's a place that I always feel, or a time I always feel uncomfortable. Whenever I go into something for the very first time, I remember the first day of every year of school because I didn't know the teacher. I didn't know who was going to be there from the year before. Going from elementary school for me, it was junior high at grade 6. We went to junior high. And so whole different world, totally unknown. That was a frightening thing for me. And then go from junior high to high school, another frightening place, uncertain, unsure. Every time I go into a new place, taking the bus for the first time, like a city bus, not a school bus, but a city bus, it's like, am I getting on the right bus? And actually I didn't. I got on the wrong bus. It didn't take me all the way where I wanted it to go. I had to walk like 2 miles to get where I wanted to be. Now, that wasn't uphill both ways. It wasn't that kind of a walk, okay? But it was just, I was anxious. I get anxious at times like that. When we're uncomfortable, those are the times that we need to rely on God and take courage. And really, it takes about 20 seconds of courage to change a situation. If you just start and say, I'm going to be courageous, we don't have to be courageous for an hour because once I'm on that bus, whether I'm going in the right direction or not, I had the courage to step on it and I'm going to figure it out from here on. And God's going to be with me. And I can trust him for that. And that's where the Israelites didn't do so well 40 years ago. They didn't trust that there was a Rahab or someone else at that point who would help them succeed because of their reliance on God. We can't make things happen in this world, but God can. And Rahab didn't have a huge part, really. She had a small part of conquering the land of Canaan, but she had that 20 seconds of courage to let them in, to hide them, and to follow through. She wasn't rich. She didn't have a great business. She didn't have this huge network, probably, anything like that. But what she had, she offered. And God used her. You see, it's God who accomplishes things, not us. We offer ourselves, we give of ourselves, but it's God that makes the difference. The final principle that we learn from Rahab is her heart of compassion. When she negotiated with the spies for safety, she didn't just think of herself, she thought of others, the people that she loved and cared about. Again, back to Joshua chapter 2, verse 11. When we heard of it, our hearts melted. I read verse 11. Verse 12 says this, Now, then please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my people or to my family because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Courage and faith includes compassion. Compassion for others. God wants us to bring people to Him. That is the call of our lives, to help people grow in Him, come to Him, to be compassionate, to show His love and His care. Her family would have faced the same destruction as the rest of the city if she hadn't negotiated. She wasn't thinking about them. If she wasn't compassionate and saying, hey, what about the rest of my family, not just me? She protected them. And they didn't even know they needed it yet. They didn't know it yet. But she did, and she was there with them. So from Rahab, we realize that it's our relationship with God isn't based on our past mistakes or our sin when we ask forgiveness, our perceived social status. That's not what matters to Him. But our relationship is based on our willingness to step forward in faith with courage. Not only was Rahab in the list of God's hall of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, but Samson is there too. And I'm always, every time I read and every time I think about it, it's like, Samson, really? Samson messed up a lot. Like, he made a lot of mistakes. He did a lot of things wrong. And yet here in God's hall of faith, not a hall of faith that maybe we would put him in, but God does. Because our relationship with Him isn't based on our mistakes and sins. It's based on the blood of Jesus Christ and living for Him. God saw Samson as someone who had courageous faith. Yahweh is the God who cares, who doesn't hold our past against us, who is eager to use what we offer to bring honor and glory to His name. We learned so much from Rahab. So my question is this: are we known as people living courageous faith? Standing with God when everyone around us is unsteady? Are we compassionate, caring about people who are on the fringe or maybe we feel don't necessarily belong or that we're uncomfortable around? You see, God tapped Joshua on his shoulder to lead the people into the promised land. He sent 2 spies in. God is tapping us on the shoulder. He is preparing us to step forward in faith and courage. He is seeking to transform our lives like He did Rahab and Samson and countless others. To partner with Him, to fulfill His plan and purpose in people's lives, and to build His kingdom.